Good morning, Hobnob. My name is Toby Bartee, and I'm going to be on the ballot for the special election this November. I want to talk a little bit about putting Mississippi in a place for greatest opportunity, sort of the motto here for the MEC. And my remarks today are going to frame where we are today and what we need to do to build a better and brighter Mississippi of tomorrow. By way of background, I was born and raised here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, graduated Pascagoula High School. Went to the Naval Academy, got my commission, BS in mechanical engineering, got my commission, served 20 years, the last 20 years in a mix of active and reserve duty as an intelligence officer. Completed rotations to Central and South America and went out to Afghanistan. And domestically, I've looked at problem sets from across the globe from bases here in the U.S. Transitioned over to the Department of State, worked in the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. We had two missions there. One was to focus on counter-narcotics trade coming to the U.S., and the second was to look at building capacity for criminal justice systems across the globe. My primary responsibility there was to take lead on several long-term planning initiatives to include their human capital management and workforce financial management, capital management. I transitioned there to the Department of Homeland Security, and I worked the Customs and Border Protection mission for about 4 to 5 years. In that role, it was the intersection between both intelligence and also resource management. My two last responsibilities before leaving there, I served as the team lead for the agency's briefing group. We briefed senior leadership on all threat streams that came to the U.S. by way of cargo or people. And the second last responsibility I had prior to leaving there was reorganizing our intelligence footprint to support both international and domestic operations as it related to border protection. I transitioned from there to go to grad school, focused on education policy with a particular look at Mississippi. I give you that background by way to build what we're going to talk about today. My past experience has been looked at focusing on data that tells you how well an organization or an institution is performing in terms of its responsibilities, or to look at a particular problem set and see if there's more that we can do. When I look at Mississippi in the long term, and one of the reasons why I got into this race is because we're not effectively prepared to compete in the coming decades. That's not a partisan assessment. That's an honest look at key data points. And I want to break out 4 of those today domestically, and I want to talk about what some of our challenges are internationally to frame how we need to build Mississippi for the future. In terms of education, there's a national test that's given every 2 years in math and reading. It allows for cross-state comparisons, and it has stability in terms of the data that it provides because it's been administered for the last couple of decades. And in the most recent assessment in math and reading, our 4th and 8th graders were 31 and 22% for math and 27 and 25% proficient. Think about those numbers for a moment. That means that roughly 3/4 of our students are not prepared for coursework at the next grade level. If you fast forward to 11th grade, all of our students take the ACT, and there are 4 subject areas in that test. 89.3% of our students fail to meet the benchmark scores for all 4 subject areas. Those numbers are too low. They're unsustainably low. And when we look at some of the pressures that will come to bear in the coming years, both domestic and international competition, and also the technological advances of AI and automation, the workforce that we're creating today is going to be the one that's most susceptible to displacement in the future. We have to have a conversation about what that means for our individual families and what that means collectively for this state. In terms of infrastructure, ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers, does an assessment, and they issued a report in 2017 called Failure to Act. I'm going to go over the Mississippi numbers here briefly, and I can talk about the international numbers, or for the U.S. here shortly. 1 out of every 8 bridges in Mississippi is structurally deficient. 3 out of every 10 roads is in need of repair. We have a funding gap of $300 million that needs to be utilized for school construction. $10 billion in the next 2 decades is going to be required to improve our infrastructure in both wastewater and water treatment. We have not done enough at the state level, and we have not done enough at the national level to address this issue. In terms of health care, we have, by way of outcomes of our healthcare system, the poorest outcomes across the nation. We had an opportunity to expand Medicare when ACA was passed, and we failed to do that. And because of that, two key numbers that you should think about. 330,000 citizens were left without insurance. We as a state left $14.5 billion on the table over a decade. Again, this isn't a partisan assessment. The Mississippi medical community in 2016 encouraged the legislature here to actually expand that. And just like our speaker spoke a couple of minutes ago, we will not be able to bring jobs to this state in the future if we're not addressing the workforce through education and if we're not addressing health care. And we have not. Internationally, we are at present engaged in the battle for global influence. And what makes this battle different than ones that we've had in the past is that we have a near peer that will be a peer within the coming decades. China will close the gap militarily and economically on us by 2050. And they are currently engaged in building influence across the globe, but specifically in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America, to the tune of $1.3 trillion. The investments that they are making now dwarf what we did as the U.S. with the Marshall Plan following World War II. And it doesn't matter if those plans are extremely successful or if they're failures. They're building influence across resource-rich continents. And that's going to shape the landscape of the rest of this century. And because we're so divided as a country, right now, you can look at our political discourse, we're not having the conversations that we have to have to position us for success in the future. The trade war that we're currently engaged in with China is an example of this. Early analysis shows that we are the sixth most targeted state in terms of retaliatory tariffs. It aims at addressing 10% of our present economy and 11.5% of our workforce. We don't know what the end of this trade war is going to look like, but what it shows now is that we have to do more to grow a more vibrant and more diversified economy, and we have to have a conversation about what that looks like. I've traveled across the state for the last few months, and I've talked to citizens, and I've heard their concerns. They are concerned about having jobs here. They're concerned about their children having opportunities that they were blessed with. They're concerned that we as a nation need to speak more united. They're concerned because they see a lack of leadership in all sectors, in all areas of government and in the private sector and in our individual communities. They hunger for us to step forward, and we must. I know the strength of our people, all 3 million here in this state. I know that we can build a Mississippi that is both inviting and inclusive, and one that is ready and prepared for the challenges of the 21st century. But for us to do that, we must realize two things. No one individual and no one sector is going to be able to see us through this. It will require a partnership between all of us. We all have to step forward and accept that responsibility. We have to talk across the divide, and we have to look at the future. Our decisions that we make must be guided by this one simple understanding. The investments that we make today will create the opportunities of tomorrow. I'll leave you with one last thing in terms of what you can expect from me as your next U.S. Senator. Any decision that I pursue, any vote that I cast, only two things will ever factor into my decision-making process. One, have the needs and concerns of my fellow Mississippians been addressed? And two, is this in the best interest of the country? If it fails on either of those two accounts, it will not get my support. And that means that no party affiliation, no special interest, and no personal consideration will ever come above and beyond the needs of my fellow Mississippians. Thank you for your time.